Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to this presentation on the book of Revelation. The class is going so quickly. This is already, I think, our fifth night. We have one more to go after this. So welcome back, Jeannie. Not to waste any more of your time. And if you missed something or you want to see it, remember everything is recorded and goes on the Spirit Alive recordings website. Jean,
okay.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Okay. So we're doing, I don't know what it's asking me here, something advanced sharing options. I don't know what to tell it to. Matthew is telling me advanced sharing options and I can't read what it says. Host only, everybody. Okay. I'm just going to exit. I'm just going to close it out. It's letting me close it out. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Okay, everybody. So welcome to session 5. And tonight we're going to be talking about some famous images, and we all know what we want to learn about, and especially the 666. So before we begin, let's go ahead and start with our prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who is, who was, and who is to come. You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. Amen. Okay, so today we're going to discuss some of the most famous images in the apocalypse. We're going to begin with the woman clothed in the sun, the dragon, the beasts, the mark of the beast, and Armageddon. But first, let us remember about a few important facts that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about images and symbols in the book of Revelation. They must be interpreted according to the historical context. They are often inspired by images found in the prophets in the Old Testament. They're never exactly the same. John is never copying something from the Old Testament, but he's drawing on many of the same classic images. And images can be fluid. They can have more than one meaning. So they are layered. They are, they're not always straightforward and simply a rigid idea that relates only to one thing. They carry with them concepts, not just one idea. Okay, so one of the most striking elements of the book of Revelation are the symbolic numbers. We haven't really spoken about that. And also symbolic colors. The most dominant colors, of course, are red and white. Red is the color of martyrdom, or blood. So in the case of the beast, he's red, or the harlot, she's riding on a beast that's red, and that symbolizes blood. White is the symbol of victory. And so the martyrs are clothed in white because they are victorious against the devil, against temptation, against the evil one who's trying to cause them to worship the emperor. But in the case of numbers, let's take a look at some numbers. 7, of course, is a very common number. We have, beginning with, of course, the 7 spirits by the throne. We have the 7 churches of Asia. The number 7, of course, symbolizes perfection and completeness. Now, we also see 3.5, which, as we know, is half of 7. This number comes up to indicate something that's partial. It's not forever. It's a significant period of time, but not an extremely long period of time. But it's not intended to mean any exact period. All of these are just indicating a concept, but not an exact period of time. So in addition to 3.5 years, we will see sometimes 1,260 days or 42 months are mentioned, and it all means 3.5. The number 12 we have seen in the case of the 24 elders by the throne. That's 2 times 12. And that's because, and we will also see 12 coming up in chapter 12. 24 elders, 2 times 12. The righteous of the Old Testament, represented by the 12 tribes, and the righteous of the New Testament, represented by 12 apostles. That doesn't mean that what John saw were the 12 sons of Jacob or the 12 apostles. It's the number that's significant. It has a symbol, has symbolic meaning. 24, as I just mentioned. So 12 is usually, we do see 12 tribes mentioned in a couple of places, and then of course 24 because of this. 144,000 is 12 times 12, and 144,000 is the number who will be saved. And that again is a symbolic number. It's people from the old and people of the new, plus the number 1,000. The thousands are the largest denomination, the largest number we see in the Bible. Obviously, if it's 144,000, it's still 1,000. They never get to 1,000,000. They didn't think of in numbers that great. We also see references to myriads of myriads. If there's lots more than 144,000 or something beyond the 1,000, they'll just say myriads of myriads. But that's considered a huge number in the Bible. So like the largest number that they could think of. And so, but again, it's symbolic of a very long time, like 1,000 years. A day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years is like a day to God or something like this. It's a representative of a large number, a very long time. So let's go ahead and talk about Revelation chapter 12, and this is about the woman clothed with the sun. And a great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth in anguish for delivery. And another portent appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems upon his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, that he might devour her child when she brought it forth. She brought forth a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, I should have paused perhaps a little bit before that to talk about the dragon. He hasn't been identified yet, but he will be. And of course, we know that he has 7 heads and 10 horns. So the 7 heads is the idea of a monstrous beast, and the horns are symbols of power. So he is a monster, and he's got tremendous power, and the diadems or crowns represent ruling authority. So he's a monster that has a lot of power and lots of ruling authority. And he sweeps down 1/3 of the stars of heaven, casts them to the earth. So of course we know that the dragon represents Satan. And this little detail about 1/3 of the stars of heaven falling to earth is one of the only 3 times that we hear reference or see reference in the Bible, the fall of Satan from heaven, which is not really described in the Bible, but part of Jewish lore. And it's mentioned here as well as in the book of Isaiah. He mentions the fall of Lucifer from heaven, and Jesus mentions it when he says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. But this idea of where the devil came from, where the demons came from, that 1/3 of the angels fell, is something that we don't get from Revelation, but was already part of Jewish tradition, forever. So this is a reference to the devil. And so we of course, we know that he's the one who's trying to devour the child the woman is giving birth to. So of course, we know that this is the Messiah, the male child. And we know this because of the reference to here, the one who is going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. That's a messianic prophecy. But he wasn't around long enough for the dragon to destroy him, because almost immediately he's caught up to God and his throne. So he's not on earth long enough to be destroyed. And so she flees and she goes into the wilderness where she's going to be nourished for 1,260 days. There's the 3.5 years time. So it's a significant period of time, but not an extraordinarily long period of time. So who is the woman? Now, this particular passage, I know that you read in your Marian feasts, like I'm pretty sure that it's December 8th, and your feast of the Immaculate Conception. We have the conception of the Theotokos. We don't read from Revelation in the Orthodox Church. It's not in our lectionary, but I've been in church and at a mass where this was read. So for that, on that feast day. So, and I know that it's part of the Catholic tradition to identify this woman as the Virgin Mary, and it's a natural thing to do so because she's the one who gave birth to the Messiah. But that is a rather late interpretation. It is not the earliest interpretation. And as we go on in chapter 12, you will see why that's not the case. Now, there can be different levels of interpretation, different levels of meaning in many passages in the scriptures. And I know it's a Catholic tradition to say that this is the Virgin Mary, but it's not. That's as I said, a later interpretation. She represents the people of God. It is the people of God who give birth to the Messiah. And we see this because, in other words, it's the church. Not in the beginning, obviously, there was no church when Jesus was born, but it's the people of God. First, they're the people of God. They are the Jewish people who produced the Messiah, the prophesied Messiah, the one who's going to rule with an iron rod. And then afterwards, it's the people of God, meaning the church. So how do we know this? And before we even get to that, where I show you how we know this, besides the fact that she flees to the wilderness where she's nourished, first, here the Apostle John is going to explain to us why the dragon is trying to destroy her and the child who is caught up to God in the throne. Now, I've told you that prophecy is never about the past. This is not a prophecy. This is a flashback. This is explaining to us the motivation of the dragon. Okay, so now we're going to find out about the fall from heaven, which was referenced earlier in chapter 12. A war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down. Now he's identified, okay? The ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So the ancient serpent, of course, connects the dragon to Genesis, and he's directly called here the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So now we know the reference to the earlier part where his tail dragged a third of the stars from the sky and they fell down, okay? So sometimes images are explained, and here it is, in case we weren't sure, it definitely is, the dragon is Satan. Now, when the Satan falls from heaven, there's a consequence to that, and that is he turns his attention against human beings. Now, I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come down, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So here again, we see how do the Christians defeat Satan? By dying, okay, by giving testimony. These are all very Christoanine ideas. We spoke much earlier about constant references to witness and testimony, which is something we see in the gospel as well. So how do they conquer? They are not spared. They're not raptured up. They conquer him by martyrdom, okay? So heaven rejoices because the dragon has been expelled from heaven, but it's trouble for the earth. Rejoice then, O heaven, this is verse 12, and you that dwell therein, but woe to you, earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. So he has only so much time to do damage. And he's attacking the people of God because he cannot hurt God. So now it's explaining to us why he's pursuing the woman. Remember, the woman is the church. The woman is the people of God. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had borne the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. This is basically the 3.5 years, but is less specific. Time and times and half a time. That, by the way, is borrowed from the book of Daniel. What about these references to the wilderness? Well, we know that when the church was suffering persecution, people did go out and live in the wilderness. They used to have to escape from the cities. And sometimes they would go out to, when we say wilderness, it could be desert, but it could also be places that were forested. But usually it was desert because this was the east. And they lived in caves and they lived in the wilderness until the period of persecution was over. And this is actually how monasticism began. People went out to the wilderness, and then they found that they were closer to God and they were praying more. And that really is the roots of monasticism. So the dragon pursues the woman. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. Remember that water is a symbol of chaos for the Jews. It's chaos and destruction. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and it opened its mouth and swallowed the river, which the dragon had poured from his mouth. And the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and bear testimony to Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Okay, so we see that the offspring of the woman are the people of God. Everybody who keeps the commandments and bears testimony to Jesus are her offspring. So I know that there's a tradition of saying that Mary is the mother of the church and that she's the offspring of all Christians or the mother of all Christians. This is a pious idea, but it's not likely what John had in mind when he wrote this. He's not thinking of Mary, he's thinking of the people of God. She's representative of the people of God. Is it Mary in a sense? In a sense, you can make that argument in a spiritual sense, but that's not the intent of John probably here. But anyhow, so she's the people of God, and the point of this chapter is to explain why is the devil persecuting us? And then the next chapter, how is it that he's persecuting us? So this is kind of an explanatory chapter, explaining to the Christians why these things are happening to them. Okay, because they keep the commandments and they bear testimony to Christ. Now, he stood on the sand of the sea. This is the very last verse of chapter 12. And in some manuscripts, it's the very first verse of chapter 13, because it really belongs in the next chapter, which is 13. In chapter 13, a development is about to take place. At the end of chapter 12, the text says, he stood on the sand of the sea. That's the dragon. He sort of planted himself on the seashore, and something's dramatic is about to happen. So from his stance, the dragon is now going to call forth the 2 beasts that we learn about in chapter 13 that dominate chapter 13. That's the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. Sometimes the beast of the earth is called the beast of the land. It's the same word in Greek. Okay, so here we have a nice little illumination from a drawing from an illuminated manuscript. Here the beast of the sea, you see, is riding on a little ship. He's giving his little staff to the beast of the land, and he's going to take over. All right, so now in a minute, you're going to learn why that is. So here's the beast of the sea. I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems upon his horns. Okay, let's stop right away with this. This is how the dragon was described in chapter 12. Okay, he has 7 heads and 10 horns and diadems upon its heads. So Now it's not that the beast of the sea has become the dragon or the dragon's become that beast. He's standing on the seashore and he's calling up the beast of the sea. And the beast of the sea has something else. He has blasphemous names upon his head, a blasphemous name upon his head. Now, we see here a map of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was identified with the Mediterranean Sea because, as you can see, it surrounds the Mediterranean Sea, which they called our sea. So the sea is identified with the Roman emperor. And he's identified, the blasphemous heads are identified with the emperor and the empire because of the titles, the divine titles that were given to the emperors. The divine Augustus, Son of God, the Savior of the world. All of them had these kind of divine titles. Now, this beast, he's going to describe him. It's ferocious, it's horrible, it's fearsome, it's frightening, it's powerful. This is an artist's rendering. If it was to look, it's impossible to sort of depict these things in an artistic way, but sometimes people try. The beast I saw was like a leopard. Notice it's not a leopard, but it's like a leopard, feet like a bear's, mouth like a lion's mouth, and to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and his great authority. So who is the beast of the sea? The Roman Empire and the Roman emperor. They are identified with each other. And this is going back to the very first lesson when I showed you the flag and Joe Biden, okay? Because when somebody sees a picture of our president, they think America. Those two are identified together. When they see the flag, they think of the United States. There's a joining of the image with the thing that it represents, okay? So the Roman Empire and the Roman Emperor are the beast of the sea. So let's look at this text again. And as I mentioned this, it's identified with the sea, and he has this tremendous power that is given to him because it was just told to us by the dragon and the blasphemous heads, the titles. So this is one of the things we want to look at here. To it, the dragon gave his power, his throne, and his great authority. So what John is saying here is that the power of the Roman Empire comes from the devil. That's the dragon. And he's the one who gave his power and his throne and his authority to the devil. So we're being persecuted because the Roman Empire is doing the work of the devil, basically, okay, trying to destroy us. So that's what he's saying. The 10 horns and the 7 heads with the diadems, power, authority, and ruling power. The blasphemous names refers to the fact that the emperors used divine titles, which of course to Jews and to Christians is blasphemy. The images of like a leopard, a bear, and a lion, these are animals that people knew of from either having seen the circuses, the gladiator. I'm talking about shows where the Romans, this didn't just happen at the Colosseum, by the way, but throughout the Roman Empire, where there would be games that were put on, and as part of it, they would execute criminals, and they would do this by letting wild animals loose on them, or that they would fight the wild animals. These are things that people knew of. When they became Christians, they didn't attend those things, but they did know about them. So they were very familiar with how ferocious these animals were, how they would destroy people, how they would tear them to pieces. So this is a reality. It's more real for them than it is for us, because we go to the zoo and we see the animals and we say, oh, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it cute? Isn't it sweet? But that's not how they thought of these animals at all, because of what they saw, in these arenas. So it's a very bloodthirsty, destructive, and fearsome beast. And the dragon has given his power, his throne, and his authority to this beast, which is the Roman Empire. Now we're going to add this. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but the mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth followed the beast with wonder. Now, this is a reference to Nero. Now, first of all, look at how, if you take it in a strictly literal fashion, this makes no sense, because a mortal wound means somebody dies. A mortal wound isn't healed. Nobody recovers from a mortal wound by very definition. Here's what happened. After the death of Nero, who committed suicide, there was a civil war in the city of Rome that lasted for a year. And it was only in the city, and there were, because Nero was the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors, and he died without leaving an heir. So, because he had killed everybody else who might be a threat to him, so he dies without leaving anybody in charge. So now powerful Roman families began to fight each other to take the imperial throne. And within 1 year, there were 4 different emperors. Besides Nero, after Nero's death, there was Galba, and these are names that you probably never heard of, then Otho, and then Vitellius. So Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, we don't know them because they didn't reign very long, but they were very powerful and very well known, members of very aristocratic families in Rome. So first Galba seizes the throne, and they all had people to support them, they got people to align with them and support them. Galba ruled for a couple of months, and he was assassinated by Otho, and he ruled for a little while, and he gets assassinated by Vitellius. He ruled for a little while, and this is when the people in Rome began to become really frightened, because it looked like the empire would not survive, because you had this succession of emperors ruling for a very brief period of time, and they were being murdered by somebody else who seized the throne. He was murdered by somebody else who seized the throne. He was murdered by somebody else. And so they were very fearful that this was going to be the end of that's what they mean by the mortal wound. All right. Now, the Civil War comes to an end when Vespasian becomes the emperor, and he was a military general. He was actually fighting the Jews in Judea at the time. He goes back to Rome, and he becomes the emperor, and then that stops the war, and that's the beginning of the Flavian dynasty that I told you about in the introduction. This is the dynasty that is the third member of the Flavian dynasty is Domitian, who is now persecuting the Christians. So that's a different dynasty, but that's how it was healed. That's how the wound was healed. Okay, now, after the wound is healed, the whole earth follows the beast with wonder. And what are they saying? Men worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast. And they said, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? That's exactly what people said about the Roman Empire. It seemed invincible. It seemed, that nobody could ever fight against the Roman Empire. That's exactly what people used to say. So now, what is the connection with the worship of the beast and the dragon? That by worshiping the beast, they're worshiping the dragon. If you worship the emperor, you are worshiping Satan. This is what he said. Okay. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words. What kind of words? Words like, call me my Lord and my God. That's what Domitian wanted to be called, my Lord and my God. Lord and God, Domitian. Okay? And to be addressed as a God, to be worshipped as a God. So he was given a mouth. He was allowed to say these blasphemous words. And he was allowed, it was the beast, to exercise authority for 42 months. That's the 3.5 years. It's a significant period of time, but not any very long period of time. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, claiming to be God is a blasphemy, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. So what's the significance of it was allowed? He doesn't have, as theologically speaking is true, the devil has no real power. He's allowed to do things. He can only do what God allows him to do, okay? So he's allowed to make war on the saints, and he conquers them. But in other words, he's killing them, but actually they end up conquering him by dying in their testimony to Christ. And authority was given it. And again, notice it's in the passive tense. He is allowed to exercise authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Now, that's again a description of the Roman Empire, which by now had conquered many, many, many different tribes and nations. We only think of the modern nations, Italy and Spain and France and, places like this, Greece. But at that time, the world consisted of many, many more smaller tribes and nations and kingdoms that Rome had conquered. So and that was the known world. That was the world as they knew it. We call it the known world, but that was the world. So to them, it seemed like the whole world was under the control of Rome, and everybody on the earth was worshiping the emperor, and therefore they were all worshiping the dragon. All who dwell on the earth will worship it. That's the beast of the sea. He told us previously that if you worship the beast of the sea, you're worshiping Satan, because the dragon gave his power and authority and his throne to the beast of the sea, and the people who worship the beast of the sea are worshiping the dragon. Everybody's going to worship it except who? Everyone whose name, or who is worshiping it, rather, not except. Who is worshiping it? Everyone whose name is not written in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. So the people who are not saved are going to worship it. So if you're a follower of, if you're destined for eternal life in the kingdom of heaven, you're not going to worship it. Now, it's not speaking of predestination here, but the foreknowledge of God about who is going to be saved and who's not going to be saved. But how is it that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world? That doesn't even make sense. Jesus was slain in the year 33 AD, right? There's an idea that from before the earth was created, of course, God knew that humans would sin, and he knew that they would have to be saved, and that he would send his son. The Father would send the Son. That was known from before the foundation of the world. The plan of salvation was in place before the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. If anyone is to be captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with a sword he must be slain. This sounds fatalistic, but he's saying that God has allowed this to happen. So if you're arrested, well, I guess you're going to jail. If you're going to die by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. God is allowing this to happen. Why? It is our opportunity to gain crowns, to gain white robes of victory, to be victorious over the evil one. So here he says, is in verse 9, here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. That previous part of the verse was the call for the endurance and faith. What is their job? What are they supposed to do? Have faith and simply endure, whatever it is, whether it's prison or martyrdom. They are called to endure. There's no promise that they will be released. Their job, the whole purpose of the book of Revelation, is to call for the endurance and the faithfulness of the saints. So let's go back to Nero, because there are allusions to Nero here in this chapter. So let me tell you what happened with Nero before he committed suicide, obviously. So Nero had wanted to build a beautiful palace called the Golden House. This was a palace just for parties, not for him to live in. He already had palaces in which to live. He wanted to build it in a very nice neighborhood where there were Roman villas that were owned by old Roman aristocratic families. He didn't want to just build it anywhere. He wanted to be right in the middle of Rome, but there was no land available because there were people with these beautiful villas that were occupying that land. Everybody knew about his plan to build this golden house. And by the way, it was completely covered inside and outside with gold leaf. That's why it's called the Golden House. Well, there was no land available. And then a fire broke out in Rome around the year 64, in the July of 64. Now, Nero happened to be out of town when the fire broke out, but he came back afterwards, after it was put out, and began a relief effort to care for people. The fire completely destroyed 3/4 of the city of Rome and damaged another part of it. And of course, you're talking about, and a lot of people died too. They couldn't escape the flames. It was a conflagration. It burned for several days. You know how fires seem to come out and be put out and then they flare up again. So a lot of people died. Homes were destroyed. Businesses were destroyed. But guess what? There's all this available land. Okay. So although he began rebuilding the city almost immediately and trying to provide relief for people who lost everything, he also began plans to establish and to build his golden palace, the golden house. And this made people suspicious. So this is why Nero is believed to have set the fire. He was not in the city, so he didn't literally set the fire. He might have had somebody set the fire, or it might have simply been an accident. But Roman historians and the people of Rome believed he was responsible for the fire. And it's kind of hard not to believe it in a way, because he was so erratic and so bizarre in his antics and his different behaviors. Now, once people started saying that he was responsible for the fire, he knew that he had to do something to blame the fire on someone else. So he picked this little group called the Christians. And they were perfect because they were a small group and everybody hated them. Now, why would I say that everybody hated the Christians? Because they were considered anti-social. They had nothing to do with a lot of things that were common in Roman life, especially the worship of the gods, attending immoral parties and shows and games where people were killed for entertainment. And they didn't send their children to the pagan schools and things like this. So they were considered kind of misanthropes, haters of mankind. And this is what they were called. So he figured that this is a good group to blame for the fire. So he used them as scapegoats for the fire. Nobody was convinced. So what we know all about this from the Roman historians, and here's Tacitus, and we'll read what he said. To get rid of the report, which accused Nero of setting fire to the city, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. By the way, the abominations that they were accused of were things like cannibalism, because they celebrated the Eucharist, they called it the body and blood of Christ. People accused them of being cannibals and things like that. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. So here's an example. This is a decoration in somebody's house of looks like a leopard attacking an executed person. His hands are behind his back and the animal is biting his face off. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. So in this case, what they did was that they tied the Christians to tall poles, like a big pole, like a telephone pole. They covered them with tar, and then they burnt them like a massive tiki torch. Because of course, if you wanted to have an outdoor party at night, you had to have illumination. There's no electricity. So they literally used these people as torches. And this is what Nero did. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus while he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer and stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme and exemplary punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion, for it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. So people knew that the Christians were not really guilty of this, okay? But there was nothing they could do about it. People either said, well, they kind of deserve it anyhow because they're such, they're so abominable to be actually, have cannibalistic rituals. There was a lot, because of the secrecy of Christian worship, there were a lot of wild rumors. So of course, this Nero martyred 977. This was a lot of people. And the most famous who died in this persecution were Peter and the rest of them, they're known to God. We don't know all of them. I'm sure there's some records of some of the others, but most of them we don't know. But it doesn't end there with a first beast. But notice that there's an association with Nero. Why with Nero? Because Nero was the first one to kind of revive the idea of the divinity of the emperor. Augustus, the first real emperor, did not want divine titles, even though people used divine titles for him. He preferred to be called the first citizen of the emperor. But Nero liked the divine titles, and of course, so did Domitian. After the beast of the sea, we have the beast of the earth. Who is he and what is his purpose? Here's the handoff of authority. Then I saw another beast which rose out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. So who is the beast of the earth? So the beast of the sea is the emperor and or the empire, because the emperor is indistinguishable from the empire. The beast of the earth is the Roman governor of the province. In this case, it's Asia, who is responsible for enforcing emperor worship. And it's very obvious if we look at the details in the text. He gets his power from the dragon, but he's less frightful. That is, he has two horns like a lamb. He's not as scary, just has a couple of little horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon because he's saying the same, he has the same message as the devil, which is the dragon. He gets complete authority from the beast of the sea. And that's what a provincial governor was, like Pontius Pilate. When a governor arrived at his province, he came with what was called the imperium. That is the power of the emperor. He was, in fact, the embodiment of the emperor. He had the full powers of the emperor to exercise it as though he were the emperor himself. That's the imperium. So let's look at the text again. He rose out of the earth, he had two horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. He's exercising the authority of the first beast. That's the beast of the sea, that's the emperor. And what is he doing? He's making everybody on the earth, that's his province, the land, and worship the first beast, the emperor, whose mortal wound was healed. Now, these are other things that happen, and we know that these things also happened. It's about the beast of the earth. It works great signs and even making fire come down from heaven to earth and in the sight of men, and followed by signs which it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast. We know that there was a way that they were able to create spectacles that look like miracles. Like today, magicians can do this today, and chemists know what kinds of substances to put together to make something blow up or poof or something like this. And so to call down fire from heaven and things like this. So they were doing this in the temples and things to impress people and to deceive people. And that's what it's telling us here. It deceives those who dwell on the earth, bidding them to make an image for the beast, which was wounded by the sword and yet lived. That's the emperor. So the beast of the earth deceives the people, makes them make an image of the beast that was wounded and yet lived, and then worship it. So the beast of the earth is the one who's responsible for identifying people, giving them the mark of the beast, and forcing them to worship the emperor. So let's talk about the mark of the beast and how does somebody receive it? Let's pay attention. So he's allowed to give breath to the image of the beast so that it could even speak. And we know that people did this too. They had ways of getting sounds to come out of statues of gods to make them look like they were alive. It causes those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. This is what the provincial governor is doing. He is killing the people who will not worship the statue of the emperor. That's what it's saying. And it causes all slave and was great and small and great, rich and poor, slave and free, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy unless or sell unless he has the mark that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666. So I'm just going back. All right, so that's what the beast of the land does. He's the one who enforces the emperor cult and marks people with the 666, that is, and sort of gives them a kind of a penalty if they don't go along with the program. Now, let's talk about some of the interpretations of this number, which is very famous in history. Jehovah's Witnesses believe it stands for human governments. Jehovah's Witnesses are very apocalyptic sect. They in the 20th century gave, I think, 3 different dates for the end of the world, and of course they were wrong. I don't know if they've done one recently, but they've given a lot of dates for the end of the world. And they believe that all human governments are satanic. They don't celebrate any kind of holidays like Christmas or birthdays or government holidays. They don't salute the flag, never serve in the army, things like this. 666, Seventh-day Adventists believe it stands for forced Sunday worship, because their thing is that they worship on Saturday, and they believe that Sunday worship is demonic. Martin Luther, of course, believed that the 666 stood for the Pope, and the Pope said it stood for Martin Luther, not surprisingly. And also not surprisingly, after the rise of Islam, many Christians took it to mean Mohammed. Now, in our culture, it's not uncommon for people to think of 666 and identify it with people like Hitler and others, okay? We've also seen at the beginning, or earlier in the 20th century, when Social Security numbers began, this was identified as the 666. And in Greece, a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, they issued identity cards, and people were, especially the religious people, were so against it because they believed it was a mark of the beast. Also, supermarket barcodes. Some of you are old enough to remember when the barcodes started appearing on packages and nobody knew what they were for because we had no scanners in the supermarkets. And some people said that that was the mark of the beast. This is one of the interesting ones, I think, that when Reagan was elected, some people said he was the beast, the 666, because there are 6 letters in each of his 3 names, Ronald, Wilson, Reagan. And of course, when Obama was elected, he was the 666. I can't remember on what basis they said that. And of course, computer chips, anything having to do with computers, all of this is that. Okay, so what is the mark of the beast? The mark of the beast, again, is a symbol. We shouldn't expect that someday people will be walking around with 666 on their forehead, tattooed on their forehead. It's a sign that somebody belongs to the dragon, and that's the devil. You know, we used to write our names on things. You know, sometimes we still do. In our books at school or other books, I've got a stamp. I stamp my books with my name. It signifies ownership. You have a piece of paper in your car, in your glove compartment, that says who this car was registered to. That's ownership. So if you have the mark of the beast, it means you belong to him. He owns you. So that's what the mark signifies. Now, the important thing is this. How do we get the mark of the beast, or how can we avoid it? The book of Revelation is abundantly clear. Every time the mark of the beast is mentioned in Revelation, it's in connection with the worship of the image. The people who don't worship the image are slain. They die as martyrs, okay? And those who do worship the image get the mark. Those who don't worship the image are slain to cause those who do not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Those who do get the mark. Causes everybody, small and great, rich and poor, slave and free, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. So there are other passages beyond where we are. We're in chapter 13. In chapter 16, we see the same thing, where one of the angels is told to go pour out his bowl, and he pours it out on the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshiped its image. Notice that those two things are connected there. You get the mark if you worship the beast, which of course is to worship the devil, to belong to the devil. Here's another one in Revelation 20. The souls of those who were beheaded, who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received the mark on their foreheads or their hands. So this is consistent. So now why the forehead and the hand? The forehead, of course, represents your thoughts. Okay, you think in an evil manner. And the hand, of course, represents deeds, what you do. So he owns your thoughts and your deeds. You're thinking in a way that shows that you belong to the dragon, or you're doing the deeds which belong to the dragon. Now, it wasn't easy for Christians to avoid participation in the emperor cult because, as you could see, it says no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. So this is a picture of a coin with Nero's image on it. This is kind of this middle one. His early coins, he was very, very young. He was 18 when he became emperor, and he's very, very skinny. He has a very skinny neck. And then as he got older, the coins actually really did look like the person. As he gets older, he looked even fatter and had like a triple chin in the older coins. But around the rim of the coin are these various titles for him. So we know that Christians were ostracized, and it was difficult for them even to go out and buy things. So let's talk about this was the real thing. We know that the 666 symbolizes a name. No one can buy or sell unless they have the name of the beast or the number of its name. So what does the 666 stand for? The 666 stands for Nero Caesar. Here's how. Both the Greek alphabet and the Hebrews, the Greeks and the Jews, did not have numerals the way we have them. You see the number 5, you see the number 2, the number 6. Those are Arabic numerals. Most of us know that. We also know what Roman numerals look like. Greeks didn't have numbers as a separate symbol, and the Jews didn't have that. Instead, they took the letters of their alphabet and they used those as numbers. And in the Greek Orthodox Church, we still do that in our liturgical books. So, for example, 70 is an omicron, is an O with a little mark next to it. So you would have alpha was an A with a little mark, like it looked like an accent on it. Vita was 2 with a little mark. Gamma with a little mark is 3. Delta with a little mark is 4. And they go all the way down to iota. That's an I, capital I, and that's 10. Lambda is 20. Iota, lambda, M is 30, etc. So you could write out anybody's name and it had a numerical equivalent. So this is what was the case also with the Jews. So Nero Caesar adds up to 666. And this is, I should have put I thought I had the Jewish letters, but it doesn't matter. Nun resh vav, nun kof zamek resh, okay? So 666. Now this was considered the epitome of evil, perfect evil, because 6 is very close to 7. So we know that evil always tries to imitate the good, and perfection and good is 7, and 6 tries to imitate good, but it can't, okay? So this begs the question, if Revelation was written during the time of Domitian, which is what I told you, how can the beast be represented by Nero? Now, I should tell you that today there is kind of a trend in apocalypse studies. There are quite a few people who are saying that the apocalypse was written during the time of Nero, because all of these details and the reference to the mortal wound and things like this seem to suggest Nero. And we know that the 666 is a reference to Nero. I don't accept that. And even though it would make that element of the interpretation easier, the reason why is because, to our knowledge, Nero never demanded to be worshipped as a god, but apparently Domitian did. And all of the early church documents that talk about John in the book of Revelation all say that it was written during the reign of Domitian and that he was exiled on Patmos during the reign of Domitian. He wasn't exiled during the reign of Nero. Nobody was, okay? Nero only went after the Christians in the city of Rome. He didn't try to institute a worship, empire worship, throughout the Roman emperor, throughout the Roman Empire. That came later with Domitian and the sort of revitalization and the desire to promulgate and enlarge the emperor cult. That didn't really happen with Nero. So I don't think that this was written during the reign of Nero. There's no evidence really, except for these little passages that seem to relate this to Nero. So why, that doesn't answer the question. If it was written in the reign of Domitian, why is this a reference to Nero? Because Nero is the epitome of evil and the source of all of this. He's identified with Christian persecution because the first Christian persecution by the Romans happened under Nero. As I said, like how Peter and Paul were both martyred under Nero. There was also a great concern in the empire that Nero never died. Because Nero committed suicide, he committed suicide, by the way, because he was so erratic, so bizarre. He was dressing up as a charioteer and riding in chariot races, and this was very scandalous and very upsetting to the Romans because it was slaves were charioteers, not people from high society, not wealthy people, certainly not the emperor. It was embarrassing. And he was extremely depraved in a lot of his sexual habits. And so he was very disturbed. And the Roman Senate had ordered that he be arrested. And he was not in Rome at the time. So when he found out about that, he just committed suicide. That's what all the Romans did. They didn't want the disgrace. They certainly didn't want to be crucified or suffer some painful death. So they committed suicide. So because he committed suicide and he died in disgrace, and he died as a disgraced person, and everybody was done with him, they were sick of him, he never got a funeral. And so rumors began that he never died, and instead he was hiding faraway place like Parthia, and he was going to come back. And there was a lot of fear that he was going to come back. And that idea that he would return or come alive again is this legend called Nero Redivivus. Nero's revived. For the Christians, it was true. It had happened in the person of Domitian. Now, the Christians didn't believe that Domitian is Nero come alive again, but he's doing the same things as Nero. What the church went through under Nero is now happening again under Domitian, you see? So they're equated with each other. And also I mentioned the coins minted by Augustus did not have these kinds of divine titles so much. He wanted to be the first among equals, but Nero reinstated the divine titles and symbols on his coins. Also because of this fluidity of symbols, Nero and Domitian are equated with each other because they're both Roman emperors and they both did the same kinds of things. They wanted to be regarded as a god. And Nero definitely thought of himself as a god. Okay. And so the scenes of Revelation are not in linear time. And for the people who were experiencing it, for the church, it was traumatic. Now, Nero is considered the epitome of evil because he was the first one to start persecuting the Christians. Just in the same way as Hitler is for all of us today, from the 20th century, from the mid-20th century on, Hitler is the epitome of evil. If somebody wants to brand somebody as an evil person, they'll say, he's a Hitler, and everybody knows what they're talking about. They don't, it would be the same as somebody, identifying a person that they regarded as evil with Hitler. You don't think they're really Hitler come alive. It's the same thing. So Nero symbolizes Roman persecution and evil and depravity in a way that is enduring forever for the church. Okay, because we have just a couple of minutes left. I was afraid we wouldn't get to Armageddon. Armageddon, let's get through this real fast. Where is it? Who's going to be fighting? The word Armageddon is not found in Jewish writings, and we think that it comes from Megiddo, which is a big flat plain where ancient battles were fought. So they used to have to fight in big flat plains. The Romans, the Greeks, and also people with chariots. They didn't fight in mountains and things. They needed to have a flat place where they could have these battles. And there's this very famous plain where lots of ancient battles were fought called Megiddo. And the mountain above it is called Har Megiddo. Har is the word for mountain. So they think it refers to Mount Megiddo. So what about this battle? It's between heavenly armies and worldly powers that oppose God. So who's going to win? Now, Armageddon is mentioned in 3 places, in 3 chapters, Revelation 16, 19, and 20. And the first thing that happens is when the 6th angel pours its bowl, that's after the 7 trumpets, we have 7 bowls. The 6th bowl poured in the Euphrates River, and it allows the enemies to come from the east. And they're coming from the mouth of the dragon and the beast and the false prophet. They're coming across the Euphrates River. So in order to understand this, you have to understand the psychology of the people in which enemies came from the east. They came from, on the other side, they came from Persia. Okay, this is the Greek world in which the enemy was Persia. Okay, they came from the areas, especially the Euphrates River was like a geographical boundary that protected Asia Minor from the Persians. So they're coming from the east. So again, it's not that Persians are coming, it is that enemies, foreign enemies that are going to attack are coming. That's where the enemies came from. They came from the east. And they assemble, they're going to fight and they're going to assemble at the place called Armageddon. Now later in chapter 19, we see the coming of the Word of God. And he's on a white horse, and he's called Faithful and True, and he's judges in righteousness. His eyes are a flame of fire. On his head are many diadems. We know that this is Christ. He's clad in a robe dipped in blood. He's the Word of God. So he's leading the heavenly armies in this fight. Now, what happens in the fight? Well, again, we know that this is the Christ because his whole army following him, armies of heaven dressed in white, and from his mouth comes a sharp two-edged sword to smite the nations, and he will rule over them with a rod of iron and tread the winepress in the fury of his wrath, etc. On his robe and on his side is a name, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we know that this is a reference to Christ. Now, what is the battle going to be like? So here is the battle described. The beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who sits on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured with it, the false prophet, and who in his presence he had worked signs, and was deceived those who received the mark, right, and worshipped his image, and they were thrown in the lake of fire, and the rest were slain. Now, where's the battle? There isn't one. Okay, now in Revelation 20, we have yet another battle. Okay, this is really Armageddon. It's not described as Armageddon, but this is after the 1,000 years, and Satan is loosed. Gog and Magog gather for battle, and there are so many vast numbers of people. They cover the whole area like the sand of the sea, and they surround the city, which means there's overwhelming power against the city, the camp of the saints. Is there a battle? What does it say there in verse 9? Fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil was thrown in the lake of fire with the beast and the false prophet. So what's the point there? What do we learn about Armageddon? It is a final battle between good and evil, between God and those who fight against God. It is not a war between nations. It is not World War III. And why not? Because nations are not good and evil. And all this nonsense that's going to be, remember, it used to be the Soviet Union and Red China. Now people say Russia and Iran, they're evil. And the United States is good. And of course, that's not true. No human nation is 100% good or 100% evil. There are good people in Russia and decent people also in Iran. So anybody who attempts to make this out as a battle between nations and Israel and the US and I don't know who else is on the side of good, that's just not correct, because the Bible is telling us that this is a battle between good and evil. And guess what? It's no battle. What does it say? He destroys them with the breath of his mouth. Between God and the devil, there's no contest. All he has to do is go, and they're destroyed. So we shouldn't be afraid of this sort of a thing. Now, will there be a World War III? God forbid, but there might be. But that has nothing to do with Armageddon, okay? Questions? I'm going to close my screen share. I don't hear anything. Does anybody wish to unmute and make a comment or ask a question?
We start that, so I'll start tonight
Okay.
too. It's Maria. I guess, I was sitting here reading this book, and maybe you can help people understand a little bit better. God allows Satan to do this. And
Yes.
you say to yourself, why should you believe in a God who allows evil to destroy other people? So it's kind of like picked up in the book of Job. You think of
Yes.
Exodus. God hardened the heart of Pharaoh so that he would persecute the people of Israel. So, I mean, when you think about God allowing these
Yes.
things,
Yes.
the image of God is, why believe in that kind of God? I mean, I can imagine if somebody took your course who wasn't a believer and they heard you say all this stuff, Jeannie,
Yes.
they would say,
Yeah.
well, those people are so stupid. Why would they believe in that God who
Yes.
let them suffer? So
Right.
what do you do? I mean, have you had people say to you, wow, what kind of
That's
God is
like
that?
sure, that's like the perennial question everybody asks. And we know as Christians that the answer to this is that God allows it. First of all, from a spiritual perspective, God allows suffering in order to allow us to become stronger. What matters is not so much our earthly lives. We place so much importance on our earthly life, but what we're really supposed to be oriented toward is the kingdom of heaven. And how many places do the scriptures say, those whom he loves, he chastises? We don't understand that either. But it's in the same way that we didn't understand why our parents disciplined us, or why our parents made us go to school when we didn't want to, or continue with piano lessons when we wanted to quit, or something like this. We are not supposed to judge God. It's a very serious thing to judge God. And we have to, we know that God gives us free will. So we don't have free will if there isn't a choice. If somebody says, well, I'm going to invite you to dinner and I'll give you a choice, what do you want to have? You could have spaghetti or spaghetti or spaghetti or spaghetti, then you don't have a choice. So God gives us a free will. We know this. This is basic Christian belief. And he gives us a free will to choose him. Without that, we cannot love God, without the free will to choose. And he allows us to be tested, and in the book of Revelation, to gain crowns and white robes and to live with him in eternity. Most of us won't be tested that way. But in the early church especially, they welcomed the opportunity to be tested for Jesus Christ. Most of us don't appreciate that. And I think it's because we become very soft. We expect everything to be nice and easy and smooth. And, oh, God is love, That's a kind of a modern thing. It's not that nobody asked those questions before, but it's especially prevalent today, right?
Thank you.
I don't think it's a satisfactory answer for most people because they have a worldly outlook. That's why people aren't satisfied with that answer. But spiritual people see the value in these things, and other people too, because you hear people, I've heard many people say, I got cancer. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. How can that be the best thing that ever happened? If we can understand that on a human level, we should accept that God allows certain things for our benefit and for our testing. And Jesus says this. He says the road is narrow and the gate is narrow and few people find it. Well, why is the gate narrow? Because we don't want to pick up our cross and follow him, but that's what it takes. That's what we have to do if we love God.
Tough message for the modern world.
No, they don't understand it and they don't accept it because they want everything to be easy. And that's part of the devil's, when you talk about the deceit of the dragon, this is part of it. What kind of God is that? How could you worship a God like that? I actually had somebody email me that question just yesterday. You know, that my mind is telling me this. I said, this is a temptation from the devil. That's what it is. And it works on a lot of people. How could you worship a God like that? And I told him, as soon as you stop accepting that, the temptation is going to go away. It's true.
Anybody else have a question? Raise your hand or unmute yourself. Any other questions? This was a lot to take in tonight. It was wonderful. Yeah, because these are all of these things in this book that you don't understand. In fact, when I was listening to you at a certain point, I think everybody who's a certain age here will remember that there used to be prayers at the foot of the altar in a Catholic church after Mass. The priest would kneel down and say, Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us into battle, be our defense against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. And I haven't thought of it in years because we don't have it.
Yes, he's the leader of the heavenly host. He's the leader of the heavenly armies.
Yeah.
I think that's how traditional that is, how old that is.
Yeah. Sister Elizabeth Hill has a question. Elizabeth, you want to unmute and ask?
I think I did unmute. I don't have a question, but I just have to say I was blown away by tonight's lecture. I mean, it just opened up a whole new way of thinking for me, and so I just want to say thank you very much, because
thank you very much.
This whole book. The reason I took this course is because I never liked the Book of Revelation. I would like dip into it and say, "Oh, please stop." I mean, this is and so you've really given me a very, very different insight into it and a desire to learn more. So I think as a good teacher, you've challenged me, and you've also given me both knowledge, but also a kind of a desire for more. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. It really is a book that's not understood because we identify it with death, destruction, and that sort of a thing. But really, it is a spiritual book, and it's calling us to remain faithful to God in spite of trials and temptations and persecutions. That's what it's all about. That's the message of the book. And we could all use that.
Yes.
Thank you, sister.
Yes, I like
Go ahead.
the whole notion of martyrdom. You talked about the reign of Domitian. How did were slaves persecuted at that time? How did they interpret that whole question?
Okay, slaves were not persecuted. Slavery was a class, but if you were a Christian slave, it had nothing to do with your status, whether or not you were persecuted. Slaves, of course, suffered a lot, and sometimes a lot of abuse, sometimes not so much, but you weren't persecuted because you were a slave. If you were a Christian, you would be. And we know that there were lots of Christians, slaves who died as martyrs, yeah.
What about Jews?
Jews, not in this case, because the Jews were exempt from emperor worship. Only the Christians were put to death because Judaism was a recognized legal religion. So, there's a beautiful temple in Rome called the Pantheon, and it's round from one angle, very famous, still standing inside. It's called Pantheon, all gods. Inside, it had an idol of every god that was worshipped in the Roman Empire, and it had a menorah. So they were legal, recognized religions. The Romans were very nervous about sedition, about rebellion. So in order for any group to meet, you had to have official permission to meet. The Jews had permission, and Judaism was to a certain degree respected because it was ancient. The Jews were an ancient group of people that had their own tradition. So the Romans left them alone, did not insist that they worship the emperor. But Christianity was illegal and it was new and considered a vile superstition. So that's why they were persecuted.
So you were also talking about earlier that the Jewish people, or a select group of Jewish people, would collaborate with the Roman authorities, right?
Yes, yes, some of them did. Yep. We know that from documents, yes. Because they hated the Christians and they were upset with the Christians because the Christians were saying that the Messiah came, your Messiah, and you didn't recognize him. And they were using the Jewish scriptures to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. And that really annoyed them. And they considered Christians of heretics, basically Jewish heretics. And what do you do with a heretic? Well, you try to put them to death, try to get rid of them.
Just one final question. I'm familiar with Aramaic to some extent. Now, the Gospels, there's in particular authors who have the Aramaic Gospels. How does that set with the Greek Gospels to any extent?
There are no Aramaic Gospels. All the Gospels we have are in Greek.
But
there is a
Jesus
tradition.
spoke for the most part Aramaic, right?
Yes, but he didn't write a gospel. There
Right.
is a tradition that the first gospel, the reason why Matthew's gospel is first in the New Testament, is the ancient Christian tradition that he wrote the first gospel and that he wrote it in the Hebrew tongue. Now, sometimes people call Hebrew the same, they use the terms interchangeably. We don't know if he really wrote it in Hebrew, if he wrote it in Aramaic. That gospel does not survive. We know that it did survive for a long time. There's lots of references to people who actually read it. Jerome saw it, Origen saw it, and others knew of the actual Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew. But it didn't survive. So we don't have it today.
Okay.
All we have are the Greek Gospels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before you go, somebody wrote in the Q&A thing, made a comment. When you look at the violence in Nero's time, what did she say exactly? After hearing of Nero, we think our world is violent now. Not much has changed except our methods of killing people. And I
Yeah.
guess that's true.
It's true.
So-
It definitely was worse then because people experienced this, on a daily basis. It was part of the culture, especially Roman culture. It was very bloody and very violent. We
Exactly.
most for us, even though we have wars and we see the brutality of wars elsewhere in the world, I don't think we're any morally superior because people watch it on TV in the form of movies. It's pretend, but we're still getting entertainment by violence in our culture. It's pretty sad.
It is. And speaking of violence, maybe we can conclude tonight with a prayer that God will guide the leaders of Israel and Hamas to come to some agreement for a ceasefire for the good of the hundreds of thousands of people now located down in Rafah, awaiting the arrival of troops who are already starving and on the brink of death. May God enlighten the minds of these men to pursue peace and not war. Peace and not war. Peace and not vengeance. And we make this prayer through our Christ our Lord, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Good night, everybody. One more class next week. We're almost at the New Jerusalem, so come back.
Right. That's right.
Good night now. Bye.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Great. Thanks a lot.